in this episode, I reckon it's one of our best ones yet. We're going to talk all about Pilates breathing, or as we like to call it, breathing.
What are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about breath.
Breath. And the Pilates elephant in the room is that there is a correct way to Pilates breathe. Woo! And it's in thinking about the lead up to this, because when did we decide on this topic? A couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And it really, the more I thought about it in the last couple of days, because I love thinking about, getting ready for what we're going to talk about. I was like, holy hell, we've got to 30-something episodes of this podcast, this Pilates podcast. We haven't talked about breath yet. And I am getting a lot of, I apologize if you felt like you haven't been heard. This is you all being really heard, because I actually have had a lot of DMs about breath and can we please address it and can we extrapolate on it. And I feel a little bit bad that maybe I've just been a bit like, do you know what I mean? Like I've just been like, which was kind of like, what else was I doing that about? And then I end up really loving the episode. Can you remember?
I don't know. Was it the headrest up or down one? Or?
There was another episode where I was like, and then I ended up learning a lot from it. So I feel like this might have been one of those ones.
Scoliosis, something like that?
No, I like talking. No, I feel like it was something else where I was just like, oh my God, why are people thinking about this? But I don't want to be dismissive. And also the more I think about this, I think this is actually going to be awesome. And I'm actually really excited.
Me too.
So bring it. So thank you. So in a roundabout way, sorry if I've been a jerk. I'm actually really thank you for all the DMs about breath, because I'm actually really stoked on this. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So it's an elephant that there is such a thing as a correct breathing pattern. I think there are a few sub-elephants there as well.
Little baby elephants?
Yeah, little baby elephants.
I saw an image of a baby elephant in utero the other day. Freaking amazing. Like they're full on, there's just like this tiny little elephant inside.
They're like little balls. They just roll.
It's
they're
fascinating.
Funny, baby elephants. They're great. They're great.
I snort laughed. This is obviously if I snort laugh, we all know this is going to be a good episode.
All right. So I reckon a couple of the baby elephants. Now, I only know, obviously we've both read Joseph's books, so we know that.
Which I have in front. We're going to talk a bit about Joseph Hubertus Pilates' book, Your Health, comedic genius. We're going to talk with all due respect to our forefather.
Joseph was awesome in so many ways, and he was a visionary genius in so many ways. But let's face it, a few times
there's some wacky shit.
There's some clangers in there.
Man, this book is a read and a half. I tell you that much. We will talk about that. What are the other baby elephants?
Well, you and I were originally trained in Stop Pilates, which is a contemporary style of Pilates, and we were told that
I'm doing a bit of that. Wasn't me going to sleep. That was me doing
exhale,
that was me doing
pursed lips. So you're supposed to always do a forced exhale through pursed lips to engage your blah blah blah, transverse abdominis, etc. And also, I was trained that even when you inhale, you should maintain some kind of quote abdominal connection unquote to maintain stability or some such thing.
Make sure your spine's stable, Raph, and your pelvis and all the things.
Yeah.
Hope you do that when you get around in life too, and not just during your Pilates class, because won't that put you at risk?
It might.
Please, guys, everyone, there's a lot of sarcasm, a lot of air quotes in there. My God, do not turn that into a quotable quote.
So I think so. The baby elephants are all right. So we're going to, we're going to read through some of the wackier passages from Your Health.
I'm really excited about this.
The whole forced exhalation thing, the idea that you should maintain some low level of transversus abdominis recruitment even on inhale rather than just totally relaxing it, which is biomechanically what needs to happen in order to inhale, that you should use paradoxically, you should use a forced exhalation, right? But you shouldn't do a forced inhalation and use your accessory muscles of inhalation, which to me is
And we're going to go over in detail the biomechanics of what happens when you breathe. We're going to and it's freaking cool, and it'll make it crystal clear to you guys. I think there's more babies though, isn't there? There's also, I'd like to also talk about the effect that cueing breath has in regards to motor learning. And also, there was one more. When could cueing breath be helpful? So we're not going to.
When is it not an elephant?
Yeah, when is it not an elephant? We love one of those. So we're not just going to poo-poo all over cueing breath, but we're going to talk about the whys.
Breath holding is bad. Why is it bad?
Don't forget to breathe. Everyone knows that's a trigger word of mine.
All right. So by the end, I think hopefully you, if you're listening, you will be you'll be pretty clear on the biomechanics of breathing. You'll have some sense of which of the above things, or why the above things are elephants, except for, and also like the last one, like you said, like when it might be a good plan to cue breath. Yeah.
This is juicy.
All right. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think the start of the story needs to be a good explanation, like a nice clear explanation of what happens when I take an inhale and I take an exhale. What happens? I would like you, don't look at me like I'm going to explain that, Raph. Like I can explain it basically, but I think you'll do a way better job. We know where my strengths
will
lie.
You pull me back in if I start going into too much physiology. All right. So, well, there are three different kinds of breathing patterns, three different biomechanical levels, I guess, of breathing. So there's basically quiet breathing, like you and I are doing right now, like if you're just sitting around listening to this podcast on the sofa or whatever.
Unless you're going for a run.
Unless you're running or doing the shopping or whatever, where you essentially just use your diaphragm mainly to breathe. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about how this all works in a sec. But so that's, basically when you're just kind of at rest, we're breathing somewhere between 12 and 18 times a minute, and we're basically just using our diaphragm for that and to inhale, and then the exhale is just relaxed. And then there's more like a forced inhalation, forced exhalation. So that would be when you're exerting yourself, like either vocally, like if you want to, yell or sing really loudly, or if you're, walking up a steep hill or doing a jump board class or whatever, and you're out at, you need more breath, and then you get other muscles involved. So you get accessory muscles of inhalation involved, accessory muscles of exhalation involved. So, you force the air in and force the air out more quickly. And then there's a third level, which is like, coughing or, gotcha. Really, you need to create a lot of pressure inside the thorax. And so that's where you get basically all of your trunk muscles essentially become involved. That's why if you've been really crook and had a really bad cough, like your ribs and everything are just aching, and we're going to go over why it would feel like internal
it's your ribs that are aching.
Exactly, like internal and external obliques.
And worse, like I remember once when I thought I'd cracked a rib from this particular horrendous cough I'd had, to the point that I got an X-ray. Wasn't cracked, but it felt like it.
Yeah. So, all right. So, basically, like this, to me, this is a fascinating topic, and I know that you're really interested in this too.
It's genuinely really fascinating, and learning about the biomechanics of this actually has kind of like made things even clearer for me. So that's what I'm excited. I think it'll happen for our listeners too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're listening to this and you're a Pilates instructor, you've definitely seen a picture or a model or maybe a real human skeleton multiple times. And if you can picture the rib cage, it's kind of an egg-shaped structure, so it's sort of narrower at the top and it flares out towards the middle and the bottom. It's like kind of the top 2/3 of the big Christmas Easter egg sort of thing. And the other thing that, if you kind of picture it in your mind's eye, is that the ribs run, from the vertebrae, from the back, they run kind of forwards and downwards. So the front of the ribs is actually lower than the back of the rib cage. So if you look at the rib cage from the side, the ribs are kind of slanting forwards and downwards, and then they kind of curl at the front. They kind of curl up and reach up towards the sternum, most of them, and so that's a very, very really cool adaptive kind of structure, because when you pivot those ribs essentially using the muscles of your torso, that it enlarges the thoracic cavity, the space inside your thorax, your chest, which is where your lungs are. So basically your thorax, the part of you that has ribs around it, your chest and mid back and upper back and whatever, is basically full of your lungs, right? So your right lung goes all the way from the midpoint of your body out to the, right out to the, it's not glued on, it's actually held on by pressure, but it's right out to you. It's the full diameter of your rib cage. And your left lung is the full width, but there's a kind of a space in between for your heart, right? So basically your ribs take up the full volume of your sort of the top 2/3 of your rib cage. Then your liver and stomach and spleen are kind of wedged in at the bottom of the rib cage underneath the diaphragm. And so your ribs, your rib cage essentially just is a mechanical bellows for inflating and deflating the lungs. And fascinatingly, the lungs aren't physically really attached to the rib cage much. They're actually held on by negative pressure between the lungs and the rib cage, which is, I won't go into that because I don't know if I can explain it.
It's all freaking out. Bodies are so amazing, aren't they?
But they're just held on by negative pressure, right?
Wow.
So there's a certain amount of, the pressure in the atmosphere is equal to the pressure in your lungs, right? So the pressure outside and your air pressure, right? If you're walking around at sea level, 760 millimeters of mercury is equal to the pressure inside your lungs. But your lungs are inside this bag of fascia, and then there's another bag of fascia surrounding that, which is attached to your ribs, right? So there's this one bag of fascia that surrounds your lungs, and then the ribs have this other bag of fascia, and then there's a little bit of fluid in between. So your lungs expand and contract within that, and then the fluid prevents friction. But because there's atmospheric pressure in your lungs and there's atmospheric pressure outside your body, but in the space in between those two fascia bags, there's a bit less than atmospheric pressure. So there's a negative pressure there. It's about -4 millimeters of mercury. And basically that sucks your lungs out into expansion and sucks them onto the inside walls of your rib cage.
And I'm guessing this then is why divers, etc., can have issues with pressure in their lungs, etc.
This is not something I've really thought about, but my understanding of that is that...
And they have to come up and go into a decompression chamber
when you get to a certain level of pressure, the nitrogen in the air comes out of solution and forms bubbles in your blood, which can then give you a stroke or an embryonism or that kind of thing.
We better park that for another one.
I'm not really... I'm outside my lane on that one.
I'll ask So my brother is, just a side note, my brother Luke is a commercial diver. So sure he might be able to answer that for us. I'll slide into Luke's DMs and say, hey, bro.
But that negative pressure that holds your lungs onto your torso, that is the reason why if you get a punctured lung, your lung can collapse because lungs are naturally elastic and they want to collapse. They have a surface tension because of the anyway, it doesn't matter what, but they want to collapse. Yep. But what holds your lung inflated is that negative pressure kind of sucking it out into into contact with the rib cage. So anyway,
that's really cool.
It is so freaking cool.
Anyway, I bet I did not know any of that. That was really cool to learn.
So your lungs sit above your diaphragm, and your diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle, which is the full circumference of your rib cage. It goes from about, it goes up to about the level of your seventh rib. So, which is about the base of the xiphoid process, roughly kind of sort of that level. And at the back, it's got a myriad of attachments. Goes down to the upper lumbar spine. It goes down to your 12th rib. It attaches here, there, and everywhere. It's got a couple of holes in the middle of it, for your vena cava to come back up, the main vein that drains blood from your lower body. It's got a hole for your aorta artery to go down to your lower body. It's got holes for the psoas to pass through it, and there's a hole for your esophagus, so food can get into your stomach. Through because your stomach's below your diaphragm. Yeah. But basically, it's a circular dome-shaped muscle. And it's domed as in like the middle is higher than the sides, like a dome on a cathedral or something like that. And so it's at rest, it is in a dome shape. It's kind of curved, right? And then as it contracts, it shortens, which makes it go straighter, right? Because a straight line is the shortest distance between any 2 points, which tends to flatten the curve, right? Yep. So it essentially the top part gets pulled down until it's flat, right? So the cathedral roof becomes a flat roof, and what that does is it increases the vertical distance from the top of your rib cage to the top of your diaphragm, right? So it increases the vertical distance inside your thorax, which means there's more space inside your thorax now, it's exactly like a bellows. Right, when you open the bellows, it sucks air in, right? Because there's now lower pressure inside than outside, right? And so that's at rest when you contract your diaphragm, it pulls down, creating a negative pressure, which sucks atmospheric air in. Or another way to say it is, it just makes a bigger volume inside your chest, which means the atmosphere pushes air into your lungs. And of course, when you breathe in, right, your diaphragm goes down and there's stuff below your diaphragm. So the dome of the diaphragm, like in a living person, is not hollow. Like when you see an anatomy illustration, like you look at the diaphragm, it's just like, oh, there's a skeleton, there's a diaphragm, right? Yeah. And there's no guts or spleen or any of that stuff. But in a living person, like inside that dome of the diaphragm, that's where your liver is, right? Gotcha. That's where your kidneys are. Yeah. That's where your stomach is. That's where your the first part of your small intestine is. That's where your spleen is. There's a whole bunch of internal organs inside that space, right? So when your diaphragm descends, it pushes them down.
I bet everyone right now just did and noticed how your tummy comes forward.
Right. And of course your tummy comes forward because your diaphragm descends, pushes your liver and your spleen and your stomach downwards. And of course, there's not empty space below your liver and your spleen and your stomach. It's full up of the small intestine, your large intestine.
It's got to go somewhere when you take
It's got to go somewhere. So it goes out, right? And that's why your belly puffs out when you take a deep inhale. Yeah. Because you're displacing your viscera, your guts into that area. So that's – and then when you simply relax your diaphragm, right, it springs back to its resting length, okay, and just by elastic recoil, okay, and the elastic recoil of your abdominal muscles, And
elastic recoil is passive.
It's passive.
It just does its thing. Like we don't have to try and get it to recoil. No. It just does it. Yeah. Yeah. So the inhale is active, right? The diaphragm is the predominant muscle that's helping you take that breath, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the elastic recoil is it going back to its equilibrium, its resting place, right?
So there's and there's
and this is just with the quiet breath. Like this isn't me doing sprints up the hill. This isn't me teaching my mat class the other night where I was teaching plus doing. I think I was getting a little bit more into the auxiliary muscles needing to kick in. I'm not going to lie. I was a bit like, okay, everyone, This is more the, I'm sitting on the lounge, patting the cat, having a chat on the phone. Having a chat now.
Quiet breathing, diaphragm contracts to inhale, and just then you basically relax all your muscles and you exhale.
Does that mean, Raph, I don't have to go?
Not when you're just sitting there, no.
Yeah, or doing Pilates, but we'll get to that. Isn't that the elephant?
Interestingly, and just as kind of a side, super interesting factoid, when your diaphragm descends and pulls down, it creates a partial vacuum inside your chest, like you like a bellows, right? You're opening up the bellows.
Yeah.
There's more space in there, and therefore there's less pressure in there. Boyle's law. The pressure and space are inversely related, but it doesn't matter about that. But it creates a differential pressure, right? So there's lower pressure inside your thorax than in elsewhere, right? Because you've just expanded the bellows, right? It doesn't just suck in air, it actually sucks blood into your lungs as well. Right? So the action of your diaphragm descending not only brings air into your lungs, it also brings blood into your lungs. Isn't that so freaking clever?
I'm mesmerized, like on the daily, by how clever the body is and how intuitive and how, we don't need to micromanage it during a freaking squat, you guys. Like,
thanks a million years of evolution.
I was going to say thanks evolution. Like I sometimes I say when I see, God, these like posts on Instagram or whatnot with the bloody big crosses and the bloody big ticks, and it's like, do you think we like seriously, if we need to micromanage someone's movement to that degree, how the F did we? Oh, we swear on this show. How the fuck did we? How the fuck did we evolve to where we are? Like, come on, like, stop for a moment, put your pretty critical thinking cap on, and like, there is some ridiculous shit going on out there. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll sit back now, but that like it gets me.
We need to do a
up.
meme which is like someone doing the ticks and crosses, and there's an X on it, and then someone not doing the ticks and crosses, and there's a tick on it.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's doing my freaking head in. There's this great one. Sorry, I know we've segued a little bit, but this is great. What's he called? The Bearded something. I'll find the link on Instagram. He's hilarious. And he did a funny meme about it. He's like, personal trainers on Instagram be like, and he's bending down to pick up like a jug of water to drink, right?
I've seen that one. That's hilarious.
And there's a big red cross on it, right? And then he's like, the green tick is actually him throwing the bottle up and down like a kettlebell swing as he's drinking the water each time as it comes up. Like, to me, that epitomizes the ridiculousness of those ticks and cross bullshit that we see on Insta. He's great, isn't he?
Yeah, awesome.
He's really funny. We'll link to him. Yeah. If you're not already following him, you should be. He's just because he's funny as fuck. But we digress. So we have talked about so far, I think we've all got a beautiful visual of, what our lungs look like inside, the rib cage and the diaphragm, and now the role of the diaphragm, and that this quiet breath it's an inhale, the diaphragm's pressing down, it's an exhale, am I right? And it's just
elastic recoil.
Yeah,
elastic recoil of your chest wall.
Don't need to do anything about
elastic
it. Our
recoil
body
of the
just
lungs.
does
Elastic recoil of the abs.
the thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you said there was 3 different sort of types of breath. So what happens with the second one? I'm guessing the second one is more when we're jogging, when we're exerting ourselves,
when
right?
you're exerting. So if you're swimming or
when I'm teaching and talking at the same time.
Right. Basically when you need more air, right? And I think, just before we get into that, I think it's really important that when you make a picture in your mind of the lungs, right, that I always used to think of like my rib cage is this kind of fixed thing, and then my lungs kind of inflating and deflating within the rib cage, right, like 2 balloons inside my body.
Right, okay.
But actually that's not what happens.
Like your ribs move?
The ribs move, and the lungs are always the same size as the ribs. Right? So whatever size your rib cage is, that's the exact size of your lungs. And your lungs only expand because your rib cage expands and your lungs are attached to the rib cage by that negative pressure gradient that we talked about earlier.
Interesting.
Yeah. So your lungs and your ribs are the same dimensions. They're the same. Like your lungs don't expand inside the rib cage, they expand with the rib cage.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's an important point for people to kind of understand as we're kind of imagining, what's going on here, because it kind of feels like you expand your lungs, but actually you are indirectly, there's no muscles that move the lungs, and the lungs aren't muscles, they can't move themselves. The only way you can expand your lungs is by expanding your rib cage or your diaphragm.
Yeah.
Or both. So, all right. And so when you need more air, so you need to get air in faster, and then you need to get it out faster so that you can breathe both bigger breaths and also more frequent breaths, what you do is you get your accessory muscles of inhalation and your accessory muscles of exhalation involved. And so basically that is every muscle in your trunk, mostly. So you have intercostal muscles. Inter means between and costal means ribs. And you have internal and external oblique muscles, you have internal and external intercostal muscles. And the cool thing, if you're learning anatomy, is that the internal and external intercostals run in the same direction as the internal and external obliques.
Oh, that's helpful.
It is.
That is helpful. So I've just got to remember my pockets.
So
Which way do the pockets go?
External is hands in pockets, whether it's obliques or intercostals, right? So as you put your hands in,
you taught me that. That's how I remember it.
Well, I can't take credit for making it up, but it's just
it's helpful.
Yeah. So if you just had a waistcoat on, say, or a hoodie, right, and you put your hands in your pockets, your fingers are kind of facing down and inwards, right? Well, that's the alignment of the fibers of your external obliques, and it's also the alignment of the fibers of your external intercostals, right? So if you imagine the intercostals, they run. Imagine like from say your fifth rib, which is at about the level of the bottom of your sternum, maybe a little bit above the bottom of your sternum, okay, between your fifth and sixth rib. Okay, well, imagine the intercostals, the external intercostal starts on your fifth rib, the higher rib, and it runs down and forwards to the sixth rib.
Yeah.
Right, so it runs down and diagonally forwards. And then inside that, you've got the internal intercostals, which just run exactly perpendicular. So they run down and backwards from the fifth rib to the sixth rib.
Yeah.
Right, so just like the internal and external obliques.
That is very helpful.
And man, I would love to talk about the intercostals for about 90 minutes because there's...
Okay, but we're not because I need to read from your health.
Okay.
And that's where really the juicy shit is. So let's keep it.
All right. So there's some really cool biomechanics around the intercostals.
Like, no, Raph, we would like that. So
no, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. All right. But because of the leverage, because the origin insertion of the external intercostals, when they contract, they tend to pull the ribs together, right? So if it's your fifth and sixth rib that they're connecting, right? So they tend to pull the fifth rib down, they tend to pull the sixth rib up, right? But because the origin on the fifth rib is further posterior, it's further back, it's closer to the fulcrum, being the costovertebral joint, the joint where your rib joins your vertebra at the back, right? And the insertion on the sixth rib is further from the fulcrum because your sternum is not a fulcrum, it's not fixed, it moves through space, right? Where your spine is more relatively fixed.
Yeah.
So because the insertion is further from the fulcrum, it's got more leverage, right? So your lower rib tends to move up more than the upper rib tends to move down because of that oblique or diagonal orientation of the muscle. Now, I'm not going to explain that in any more depth, but it's freaking awesome.
Don't you
thing
have
to contemplate.
is this in your anatomy? We do have.
No, this isn't in the anatomy course. Oh. Yeah, we could do a whole new anatomy course on the anatomy of breathing.
You could. Yeah. Well, gosh, I think it'd be a hit, Raph. Slide into our DMs if you want to have to create that.
And because the internal intercostals are oriented exactly opposite, so when they contract, they tend to depress the upper rib, right? So the external intercostals tend to pull your ribs up. And the internal intercostals tend to pull your ribs down. Now, of course, the external intercostals, so when pulling your ribs up, because your ribs, as we said at the start, are angled down from back to front, right? The front of the ribs is lower than the back of the ribs. Well, as you pull your ribs up, they pivot around, okay, lifting the sternum and they call it a pump handle movement. But basically, if the ribs angled down and then it pivots up till it's horizontal, well, actually, the horizontal distance from the front to the back got bigger.
Okay. Sorry. So everyone, for listeners out there, that was my brain going, I need a moment.
So
I think I need a bit.
If I put my arm out straight in front, right? Well, not straight in front. My arm's angled downwards.
I do hope that some of our listeners are with me sometimes brain-wise with this. Like, they're like, come on, Chloe, catch up.
And my fingers are now, a certain horizontal distance from my torso.
Yes.
Right? As my arm lifts up, like look where my fingers are relative to the cup here, if you're watching the video.
Yeah.
As my arm lifts up, my fingers are now further that way, right? You can see where they are relative to the cup. They're past it, right? And you can see as my arm goes further and further down, eventually my fingers are level with my torso,
Right.
Right? So the further up my arm comes, the further away my fingers are.
I'm with you.
Right?
Yeah.
So if this was a bellows from my torso to my hand, right? The more I raise my arm up, the more space there is in the bellows.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I'm not sure how well that translated on radio, but if your hands by your side,
It's radio. I love that.
Okay, if your hands by your side, there's no horizontal distance between your hand and your torso. Right?
Yeah.
As you lift your arm forwards, the horizontal distance between your hand and your torso increases more and more, right? Just sit and then lift your arm forwards and you'll find that your hand gets further and further away from you, right? And as your arm is horizontal, your hand is at its maximum horizontal distance, right, from your torso. And as your arm goes past horizontal, the hand gets closer to you again, in a horizontal plane, okay? And that's exactly what happens with your ribs, because your ribs are angled downwards when they're at rest, okay? And so when you lift the ribs, just like lifting your arm, the horizontal distance, the fingertips get further away, right? And the fingertips in this case are the sternum. So as you lift your chest, the sternum moves forwards, okay? And, everyone's at home looking in the mirror, taking a deep breath in, going, well, fucking duh, But there's a really cool biomechanical reason behind that, and that is why your ribs are angled downwards, right? When you look at a skeleton, you see the ribs angled downwards. Maybe you've never wondered, like, why are those ribs?
I must admit, I've never wondered. Why aren't they just
circular? Why,
I've never wondered.
Why are they this weird shape and they kind of go down and then back up again?
I've noticed, but not wondered.
Right? Well, that's why they go down and back up again.
Gotcha.
Right? And also at the side of the rib cage, the side of the ribs is lower than the front and the back of the ribs, right? So they go down and then they come back up again. Yes. Right? So the side of the ribs, as the side of the ribs lift up, there's what's called a bucket handle movement, which just pivots, and the same as a bucket handle, as your side ribs elevate, your chest becomes wider, right? And again, if you look in the mirror, take a deep breath, you'll go, yeah, duh, like that's obvious. So, well, that's the reason your ribs are lower at the sides and then they come back up again at the front. So, anything we can do to elevate our ribs, right, is going to increase both the anterior posterior distance from our spine to our sternum, the anterior posterior diameter of our thoracic cavity, right, increase the volume inside there, and it's also going to increase the lateral, the side to side size of the thoracic cavity, right? So anything we can do to elevate our ribs is going to create a bigger thoracic cavity, which is going to create open the bellows more, okay, which is going to create more negative pressure. It's going to suck in more air, right? So we use our external intercostals to elevate the ribs. And we can also use, because when we use our external intercostals, they pull the ribs up, but they also pull the ribs down a little bit, like they're pulling just two ribs together, right? So we use our sternocleidomastoids and our scalenes in our neck to fix, because the scalenes attach to the first two ribs and the sternocleidomastoids attached to the sternum, and they fix the sternum and the top two ribs up, and then the external intercostals pull up all of the rest of the ribs, from that support, right? And then we can get other muscles involved, like we can get serratus posterior superior on the spine. We can get the erector spinae to pull the spine into slight extension, which elevates the sternum. Like you could basically get like almost every muscle.
You're going to tell me how to activate one of those one at a time, Ralph? Air quotes. So that's the inhalation with exertion.
Yeah, and of course the diaphragm's still going hell for leather at this point.
Yeah, this is like the diaphragm needs some of its mates to come in and help.
Right. So
is that what we're talking about?
So at rest we've just got the diaphragm, and then as we go to a forced inhalation, like you're running or you're going to take a big shout or whatever, you are using your external intercostals, you're using your sternocleidomastoids, your scalenes, your serratus posterior superior, which go from your sort of mid-thoracic up to your ribs in a V, sort of underneath your rhomboids-ish. And then you've got also your erector spinae, so your longissimus, your spinalis, blah, 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 iliocostalis, all of those ones, which pull your spine into extension, which also opens your thoracic cage wider, which creates more pressure differential, which sucks in more air.
Gotcha.
Right? So all of those things, and I think, they're in comes one of the elephants, which is that you shouldn't, air quotes, use your neck muscles when breathing.
Bloody hell.
Right? Which is like, okay, well, while you and I are sitting here relaxed, okay, yeah, we probably don't need to use our neck muscles, right? We're just using our diaphragm, right? But if you go for a brisk walk, yeah, you need to use your neck muscles.
Or if you're doing a brisk Pilates class, right? I get out of breath in Pilates.
Anytime look, just try this out at home, right? Just go stand in front of a mirror and take in the deepest breath you can take. And guess what happens?
I know, I'm looking at your neck right
muscles,
now. Yeah.
And try and do it without contracting your neck muscles. You fucking can't.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they're part of the movement.
So this is one of those, and this happens a lot in the realm of Pilates, hence why this is an elephant and we're talking about it, is we make up these outrageous rules that if you actually knew the biomechanics or the anatomy.
Yeah, once you know the anatomy, they don't make sense.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't recruit your sternocleidomastoids and your scalenes in your neck, at the front of your neck, to fix your sternum and your first two ribs, well, your intercostal is just going to pull the ribs down instead of up, which is going to cause you to exhale rather than inhale. Right?
So you're just going to be like, I think you end up hyperventilating or something.
So to take a full inhalation, including to breathe into the sides of your ribs, right? Because that's still the intercostals doing that.
The whole I'm visualizing now. When we were doing STOT training back in the day, and you'd teach your clients this too. You'd get them everyone had to put their hands on their own ribs, or even better, you'd come up to the client and you'd put your hands on their ribs and get them to.
You could use a flex band. Tied up around Emily Bronte style.
Yeah, I did that as well. And you had to expand into that, and it was like, oh boy, oh boy. Okay, so we've covered the inhale, but we haven't covered the exhale. So the exhale, whereas when it's just like at rest breath, the quiet breath is just the elastic recoil. Now the exhale, when we are actually doing something that's asking more from us physically, exertion-wise, what's coming into play there?
You get your internal intercostals because they do the opposite. They depress the ribs.
Yeah.
You obviously relax your sternocleidomastoids and your scalenes and your rectus spinae.
Am I relaxing?
Whatever.
So I'm relaxing my neck now?
Yeah,
Good.
Neck,
okay, great.
And you also engage your rectus abdominis, your transversus abdominis, and
internal, external obliques.
Internal and external obliques, they come in like only really at the top end of it, like when you're really working hard, like if you.
Right. So, that's kind of me anytime I sprint at the moment. I'm a bit out of practice with my sprints. Actually, look, guys, I may as well just be honest. It's kind of me when I run at the moment. Being a bit slack, being a bit, too busy with my kittens. And I noticed when I did go for a run the other day, I was like, feeling a little bit sick at this point, and actually literally had to stop. So I'm thinking all my abs were doing the thing possibly. At that point.
Yeah.
It wasn't pleasant.
I can.
It was like what part of it has to be comfortable sometimes too. It's like, just get the thing done, right? I was like,
flashbacks.
Adam Meekins would be just like, just fucking do the thing. Just go for
there's a T-shirt going around at the moment that says no one cares, just work harder.
No one cares work harder.
I don't really endorse it actually.
No. But sometimes I do need to pep talk myself to be just like embrace the discomfort.
Yeah, I think embracing discomfort sometimes is a good thing. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Anyway, we digress. So, okay, so there's all these other auxiliary muscles happening, and now we're getting the abs involved, et cetera, et cetera. Cool.
Right.
Okay, so we've ticked off one, we've ticked off two. You said the third one is when we're like having a coughing fit or...
Yeah. Well, just before we go into that, I just want to touch on one of the elephants we talked about, which was, and again, I know Stop Pilates, right? Because that's what we were...
So for those that might be just new to Raph and I and Raph's and my journey, because I know that some, you listeners, you're freaking awesome. Some of you are going like right back to the start. Like I'm getting DMs of people. I got a DM the other day from a new listener, and she had binge listened to 11 full episodes within a weekend. And I was like, holy shit, I only thought like that happened on Netflix. So thank you so much for binge listening to Raph and I. That was real. That gave I felt really chuffed about
awesome.
that.
That was awesome.
I had a real moment where I sat down and went, what even is life? This is so crazy that someone would binge listen to us, like in the best possible way.
Isn't it so awesome that we live at this moment in history where, the technology is available and we're all so affluent that we can sit around making podcasts and listening to podcasts and stuff like that. And we can if this was 100 years ago, there would have been kindred spirits all over the world.
Shakespeare would have been writing about the bards would have been.
But you can't connect with people, right? Because it's like 6 months to get a letter to someone across the other side of the world.
Ship.
And but now we can just make this podcast and you guys can just listen to it, send us a DM, Pam. We can have an actual dialogue, an actual conversation with you in real time. It's fantastic.
It's so cool. So I know that some of our new listeners, they're going back from day one and going forward. But I also know that some listeners are coming in at like the latest episode. They're like, oh, this is popped up in my suggested, podcast that I might be into, and they're starting there. So Raph and I were both originally STOT trained. So we've had quite the journey ourselves with, unlearning and relearning, or unlearning and learning. It's it's not really relearning, is it? I don't know. Learning, just
letting go of old ways,
critical thinking, etc. So we were absolutely trained in the whole. There is a correct way to breathe in Pilates, and there is a correct alignment, and there is a correct yada yada.
Who trained you in that, Chloe?
Raphael Bender is to blame. Everyone, thanks, Raph and Nick. Thanks to both of you.
Yeah, damn you, Nick Maz.
We love Nick. Nick, if you're listening, we love you. Couldn't do it without you. So Nick Maz and Raph have actually been my two mentors.
We trained you up in how to breathe properly, didn't we?
Near on 9 years. And
those lateral and posterior lobes of your lungs.
I've got them to blame for freaking everything, to be perfectly honest.
So all right. So when we were trained up in those old Stop Pilates days, my recollection is we used to teach that even on the inhalation, you should maintain some low level of transversus abdominis activation. Because I remember, like in all of those manuals, it used to say inhale to prepare, engage your pelvic floor and deep abdominals, blah, blah, blah. There's a little spiel that you used to memorize, right? Yeah. And so it was, the idea was,
because you must stop people from moving before they move.
Right. So you have to maintain some level of transversus abdominis recruitment even on the inhale, right? Which, I just want to think through now for a moment, right? So the action of transversus abdominis, the fibers of transversus abdominis wrap horizontally around the lower torso. They go up to about your T5 rib internal to the rib cage. They go down to your pelvis, to your symphysis pubis, to your spine. The fibers are horizontal. It doesn't flex or extend the spine significantly. It doesn't cause rotation, but what it does do is narrows your waist. So it narrows the sides of your waist, narrows the waist from front to back as well. So it basically is literally like a muscular corset that surrounds your lower abdomen. If you're a Pilates instructor, you're going like, eye roll, yawn. That's what I teach people on the daily, right? All right. So transverse abdominis narrows your abdomen, narrows your waist, right? When you do a relaxed inhalation, what happens to your waist?
It gets wider.
So if it gets wider, what's happening to transversus abdominis?
It's relaxing.
It's relaxing and lengthening, right? So in order to do a relaxed inhalation, you must relax your transversus abdominis.
Correct.
To the degree that you maintain your transversus abdominis recruited, you are opposing the diaphragm. The transversus abdominis is opposing the diaphragm. It's like doing a bicep curl and contracting your triceps at the same time, right? It's literally like that, because it's directly opposing. Your diaphragm is squishing your viscera downwards, right, increasing the pressure in your abdominopelvic cavity, and your transversus abdominis, in a relaxed breath, just relaxes and lengthens and allows the pressure to normalize. So there's the same amount of pressure inside as outside, right? Whereas if you maintain your transversus contracted, all you're doing is pushing back against the diaphragm, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like I feel like there's been times in the past when I've been, involved in a photo shoot or something, and I've been like trying to suck it in, right? Not that it's like you got to have viscera, guys. That's fine, but it's a photo shoot. It's like sucking it in. You try and take that inhale while sucking it in. I tell you what, you end up with. You end up with a stomach ache at the end of the shoot. That's what you end up with. A hardcore stomach ache.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Ow.
Just suck it in like crazy, but look natural.
Yeah. Smile, relax your face.
Hi, this
Stop
is
that weird face, Chloe. I'm fucking trying.
Yeah, this is just me, laying around. Oh, I didn't know you were there with the camera. Yeah, we've all been there. No shame. All right,
but I'm just seriously, I've had a really sore stomach after doing that, after trying to squish my viscera. And spoiler alert, everyone, we need viscera. It's really normal for your tummy to get soft and get bigger and all of those things when you breathe, right?
Well, it's part of the biomechanics of relaxed breathing, right?
Yeah.
So the more that you recruit your abdominals as you inhale, the more difficult it is to inhale. And therefore, the more you need to recruit your accessory muscles of breathing, right? So if you're maintaining your transversus, contraction whilst inhaling, well, your diaphragm can't descend as far because there's too much pressure down below. So you're going to have to get your external intercostals involved, which means you're going to recruit your sternocleidomastoids and your scalenes. Right? So
how do you just roll? Roll those names, just roll off the tip of your tongue. It's quite impressive. I'm like, you said, step.
We've all got our little tricks that we can do at parties, and that's
Cage line, by the way. If you haven't got your push up yet, cage line. Okay, cool. So that whole you needing to maintain an engagement of your transversus abdominis whilst taking your inhale is just.
It's nonsensical.
It's nonsensical. We could have put that in our nonsensical cues episode. Yep. It is nonsensical.
Yeah. It's like saying contract your triceps while you do a bicep curl. It's directly opposing the action of the muscle that you use.
Okay, great. So excellent. Tick that little myth off. So can we move on to the third one?
Yeah. Well, the third one's really quick and easy. It's just like coughing or, like really maximal, I don't know, if you wanted to shout as loud as you could. I guess it's really mostly coughing and sneezing and stuff like that.
Would it be singing? Like if you're like death metal?
Maybe, but I think, the literature I've read really says coughing and sneezing are the real big things. That's where you really, because you want to explosively expel something, right, out of your throat or whatever if you're coughing, right? So you want to maximize the pressure in your lungs to pop the cork out of the champagne bottle, right? And so you just recruit everything, and that's when you recruit your internal and external obliques maximally, your transversus abdominis maximally, like to push your viscera in. You have to recruit your pelvic floor as well because that keeps the pressure inside your lumbopelvic cavity, which pushes your viscera
pelvic
up.
Floor, there's some Pilates crack right there, Raph.
Yeah, well, we could talk about that. I've just written an article for Men's Health on pelvic floor.
Have you?
Yeah,
for Men's Health magazine?
Yeah, on men's pelvic floor.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so I'm neck deep in the pelvic floor right now.
Wow, Raph. Men's Health magazine, Body and Soul magazine. This is cool.
Yeah, and we can link. I don't think the Men's Health one will be out yet, but with the Body and Soul one we can link to in the show notes. Yeah,
which was fantastic about empowering body positivity and finding a instructor that does those things for you.
It's not fear-based.
It's not fear-based that lifts you up.
Yeah, and so that's why when if you've been sick and been coughing a lot, you get sore abs and sore ribs because you're using those forced exhalation muscles, those accessory muscles of exhalation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the biomechanics of breathing. I think the last thing I just wanted to touch on with that is that because the accessory muscles of inhalation, a lot of them are spinal extensors, rectus spinae, etc. Also your accessory muscles of exhalation are all your abs, basically, right? Your flexors. So when you extend your spine, you essentially tend to inhale, right? And when you flex your spine, you tend to exhale. And that's why as you extend your spine, it's really hard to exhale, right? Because the action of extending your spine naturally increases the volume of the thoracic cavity, right? So if you want to exhale while you do that, you've got to work your diaphragm and your abs really hard but it limits how far you can extend if you truly want to exhale, because extension and exhalation are kind of opposed movements, right? The muscles used to exhale of abs, and the muscles used to extend are extensors. So it's like, again, it's like driving with the brakes on. It's the opposite.
Well, I'm doing this face at you, Raph, because I have been asked by a Pilates instructor before to do that breath pattern, and like it's like, oh, what? like why are you putting the brakes on my on my extension? Why are you doing this? Like it's like this feels so just
it's
constricted
literally
and
retarding the movement speed.
Yeah.
And the same is as you inhale, as you flex. Well, inhalation is, fundamentally, if it's not just a relaxed inhalation, if you're using any of your accessory muscles of inhalation, you're creating an extension force on your spine. And so if you're trying to inhale and flex, again, you're trying to do sort of two mechanically opposite things, because the muscles that use you to inhale are your extensors, and the muscle that used to flex are your flexors.
Okay, so we've fully and comprehensively gone through the biomechanics of breath.
Not fully and comprehensively. I mean,
is that taking it too far? Yeah. Okay, I know you would have liked to have spent 10 hours on it, but it feels pretty full and comprehensive to me. I thought that was amazing, and I'm sure
I would have liked to talk more about the moment arm of external intercostals and how that causes.
Really into the intercostals, hey? Okay, the intercostals are your jam. There we go.
And we didn't even mention pectoralis minor. So when you're inhaling,
when I get
pectoralis minor elevates, if you fix your shoulder girdle, so if you use, say, your lower trapezius, your middle trapezius, your upper trapezius, rhomboids, to fix your shoulder girdle, then your serratus anterior and your pec minor can elevate the ribs, right? So your shoulder girdle muscles essentially, become accessory muscles of inhalation, which I forgot that whole section. Yeah.
Because I have definitely pulled up with sore pecs before as well after a horrendous coughing.
Well, yeah, coughing, it's a whole body exercise.
Really? Like it really is. It really is a whole body exercise. It's not one I'd like to do. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones. So in my hot little hand, I have
in your hand, your scratched and scarred hand.
Yeah. Look, I've got 2 kittens at home. My hand modelling days are well and truly behind me, and in fact, I'm probably going to get some interesting looks the next time I go and get my nails done.
If I want something from you and you say you don't want to give it to me, I'll just scratch your hand from now on. So.
I know. Yeah, it does show they are a little bit rude now. My cats ask for things, aren't they? It's like, hey, Mum, we're just going to scratch the shit out of your hand. Can we have a treat? Yeah, it's a bit warped. I am definitely their servant, and anyone who owns cats will know that. But look, before the break, we talked about the biomechanics of inhalation and exhalation. We talked about some of the really wacky nonsensical cues that are out there in
baby elephants
that are out there in the Pilates stratosphere. And I thought, look, we can't have an episode of Pilates Elephants on breath without, and if there is a particular Pilates breathing, Pilates breath, there is a correct way to breathe in Pilates. If we're going to talk about that, well, we need to talk about what did the man himself, Mr. J.H. Pilates, have to say about breath, okay? And I think because what I do feel like a lot in the Pilates world is you hear this argument, but it's Pilates. It's not Pilates if you don't do it this way. It's not Pilates if you don't do this. It's not Pilates if you don't do this. It's not Pilates if you don't do the principles of Pilates. I'm sorry, but hey, freaking, oh no, I'm starting now. Oh, shit. It's like Russ, like here she goes. Oh man, I've got her all wound up. Now,
the principles of Pilates.
The principles of Pilates. I'm happy to do an episode on that, because if you're going to throw that shit at me, read Return to Life through Contrology. He does not mention one of those principles. As in, he definitely talks about elements, but he didn't create those principles. It was created my understanding is, post his death, when you had the elders, when you had potentially Romana bringing in the first of the teacher training, Yeah. And I know that there might be someone out there that understands or knows the history more than me, and I'm happy to be corrected on that. But if we're going to look at Joseph's literature that he left, which was he left us 2 books that I know of. His first book being Your Health, which I think was first published in
about
the
1936, something like that from memory.
It's wacky as shit. We're going to have a little chat-skis about this in a moment. I'm going to read you one of my favourite passages where I think he was potentially wildly drunk. And then that was a bit controversial, me putting that out there, Raph. Have we just been cancelled? And then we all know Joseph liked to tipple and however many cigars a day. But I digress. And then his second book, which was published in the 40s, which is Return to Life Through Contrology, which has his set of 34 mat work exercises in it and does have, some of his, he talks about what he's into, basically. They know, and here are the principles of Pilates, right?
Principles.
So, depending on what school you went to, you might have been given 9 principles. You might have been given 7 principles. Hey, you might have come to Breathe Education and they're not given any principles. Ooh, how controversial. So I would just like to do a little bit of story time here. And I have got...
Oh, this is fun.
This is really fun.
I'm settling in.
And settle in. So, but before we do that, I'd just like to say that I actually had to read this book originally as part of
Who made you read it?
Raphael Bender. And I got to say, guys, the first time I read Your Health, I had to sit down and go, holy fucking shit, this is what I've dedicated my life to. And I had to really question
it's
it a little bit.
It's right out there, isn't it?
And
the whole skin brushing thing.
But come on, read Cage Line, do another push-up. And Joseph used to come at his clients when they were naked in the shower with that bloody communal scrub brush. That is wrong on so many levels, and I'm happy to have a whole episode talking about that scrub brush. But let's move on. Shaman's got one. Belle's got one. Okay,
scrub brush.
Yes. And one of our listeners messaged me before, and she's like, Chloe, reading Cage Line, I have just gone and got the scrub brush. And I'm like, can everyone stop with the fucking scrub brush? It's gross. It's gross. But look, if you want to use your own scrub brush, just don't share it. I don't think that's hygienic. And
maybe you've created a monster, Chloe, unintentionally.
It's possible. No. Second snort laugh for the episode. This is going to be gold. So, okay, let me read from Your Health, a corrective system of exercising that revolutionises the entire field of physical education by Joseph Hubertus Pilates. Now, I've got a little highlighted section here because I just want to set the scene. This is what JP wrote in his book. This is page 15 in my copy. Pardon this thought, but is it not idiotic, figuratively speaking, to permit oneself to be led around by one's nose by these wholly mercenary, unscrupulous and irresponsible exploiters who, through their misleading advertisements, fake references and unconscionable methods, prey upon the blind credulity of the public? Think it over, you saps. And he uses an exclamation mark there. Think it over, you saps. Hocus, and I'm kind of down with this bit because I think he might be calling out woo, even though he's got some decent woo in this book. Hocus pocus is hocus pocus by any other name, under ideal true conditions, etc., etc. That's interesting, right? Think it over, you saps. Now, he's passionate in this paragraph. He's super freaking passionate. I think he's a bit angry. I think he's a bit pissed off. And we know if you've read Cage Line and you listen to John Howard Steele, talking about his experience of friendship with Joseph. Joseph was this tortured, caged lion.
Frustrated.
He was frustrated. He felt like he had a lot to offer humankind.
He felt everyone should be doing Pilates. Yeah. And no one seemed to understand that.
And he also felt like he'd been quite ignored by the physical therapy. So he's mad. He's cranky in this. Think it over, you saps. Okay, so that's he's talking to his readers. So you can imagine too, if this is how he talks to his readers in the book that you think they've just purchased, it would have been interesting being taught by him one-on-one, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Well, from what I've heard, he didn't do a lot of talking.
Yeah, there's images, there's interesting images in this book where he's comparing himself to his clients and saying, see, look at how bad they are and look at how you could be if you do my exercise. And I'm like, talk about body shaming. What the fuck? But anyway, cool. Okay, now I'm going to talk about breath. And Joseph's viewpoint on breath. And he actually puts this in chapter 8 of Your Health. And he actually puts this in chapter 8, the title of which is First Educate the Child. So he's basically coming from, well, if we can set, and I mean, kind of seeing this, if we can set good habits of health and physical fitness from childhood, we're setting up adulthood, right? So, again, it's this kind of like 1 minute I'm loving the things he's saying. The next minute I'm like, dude, what the F? And we've got to know too, like he was a product of his time. He was born, in the late 1800s. He was a sickly child himself. He had asthma. He had rickets. He lost a freaking eye, you guys. Like, think about this for a moment. The guy had a glass eye. He lost an eye prior to the invention of penicillin. That's hardcore. That's hard freaking core. Okay. So he had an obsession with health. He had an obsession with breath, which you can be compassionate towards, right? If you've got asthma, and this is asthma before asthma pumps, right? This is asthma before Ventolin. He's lost his eye before penicillin. He's got asthma before,
Didn't stop him smoking the stogies though.
Well, and again, product of his time, wasn't it? Because I remember my grandfather, when my grandfather quit, but I remember when my grandfather smoked, and I remember when my grandfather smoked pipes. And, there was all this narrative around, well, it was relaxing. It was good for your health. It was good for your nervous system. Hell, they used to put cocaine in Coca-Cola.
I've seen magazine advertisements from the 20s and 30s with doctors recommending cigarettes.
Right. So I can see all that, but then I can also really clearly see where he might have been, really interested in breath, right?
Where his obsession came from.
Correct. And how to facilitate a bigger breath or a more easy,
Well, the whole thing with asthma is you can't take a full breath.
Right.
And so he was all about taking a full breath, as we're just about to learn, right, in story time.
Correct. And ultimately he passed away from emphysema. Yeah.
All those stogies.
Yeah. So here we go. Settling on in now. I'm going to get my reading voice on. I always thought I might like to narrate a audiobook, but I digress. Everyone who my voice annoys is just there going, are you fucking kidding me, Cloe? But anyway.
You've got a great voice.
Thanks, Raph. Thanks. The first lesson is that of correct breathing. Children must be taught how to take long, deep breaths sufficient to expand the upper chest to capacity. They must be properly instructed how to draw the abdomen in and out at the same time, holding their breath for a short time. We're gonna pick the logic apart of this in a second, right? Then they should also learn how properly to fully deflate the lungs in exhaling. To properly deflate the lungs is an art in itself, and this final step in correct breathing is less understood. As a rule, it is seldom, if ever, properly taught unless the individual is privately coached by one who understands what it's really all about. Correct breathing exercises under the dominance of mental control would undoubtedly accomplish more toward the prevention of tuberculosis, as well as accomplish more towards attaining and maintaining maximum health standards than all other remedies combined. The lungs cannot be completely deflated at first without considerable effort. With perseverance, however, the desired results can be accomplished, and with increasing power, gradually and progressively develop the lungs to their maximum capacity. that will actually, I think my eye's twitching, that will actually cause the chest to balloon and at the same time bring practically every other muscle of the entire system into play. Thus, the child's posture will then be normal, in inverted commas, natural. Not inverted commas, in brackets, natural. With proper breathing and correct posture, the child has no need for artificial exercise. Walking, running, jumping, tumbling, climbing, wrestling, etc. natural exercises calculated by Mother Nature to develop her children normally.
It's interesting
I'd love your opinion.
Well, it's interesting the sort of dichotomy there between the end part where he says, let Mother Nature sort of
science,
run it.
Mother Nature, science, Mother Nature. And he references science, like he uses the word science.
Yeah, but I don't think he means by the same thing that we mean by it.
I don't think he does either. And he uses a lot of anecdotal evidence. Yeah. So what do we take from that?
He's talking, all right, so he advocates a full inhalation to inflate the upper parts of the chest. So that's a full forced inhalation, right? And then he advocates holding the breath whilst inflating and deflating the abdomen. I can't remember the exact word he used.
Here we go. So they must be properly instructed how to children must be taught how to take long, deep breaths sufficient to expand the upper chest to capacity. They must be properly instructed how to draw the abdomen in and out at the same time holding their breath for a short time. Then they should learn how to properly and fully deflate.
All right, yeah. So take a breath in, move the abdomen in and out.
Really hard.
It's kind of weird.
Is everyone trying that? Seriously, try that. It's freaking hard.
Just adjusting your intra-abdominal pressure, the pressure within your abdomen, right? Because when you take a breath in, your diaphragm descends and you move your abdomen out, the pressure decreases, you move your abdomen in, the pressure increases.
Because at first I thought, is he going for the Valselva? But no, you're doing this unusual,
it's sort of a belly dancing maneuver. Yeah, so I can't.
It's very belly dancing.
I can't really imagine what the functional benefit of that might be. Even like what he thought the functional, maybe just control of muscles, was the benefit he was going for there. But it's certainly, not. I can't think of any particular functional outcome. Like it's not going to enhance the stiffness of your torso or anything like that. So the full inhalation, well, he's advocating a forced inhalation, which is a useful thing to be able to do when you're running or exerting, etc. But, why?
It would expend a lot of unnecessary energy to do it
when
at
you don't
rest.
need to, yeah. And why I'm not clear on why people need to learn how to.
I feel like it's almost made me feel a bit hyperventilating, a little bit.
Yeah. So if you run, you can take full breaths when you run. Like, why do you need training in how to do that? It's not clear to me.
So, for those that say if you are not cueing Pilates breath when teaching Pilates, you are not teaching Pilates. Well, what? So I haven't been to any. I'm sorry, but in all the classes I've been to, including by classical instructors,
that's not the breath I teach.
I have never been taught this breath ever.
I've been taught that.
I've been taught
with
the
hundreds.
Well, yeah, and I've been taught the stot and I've had clients that have come into my class. It's been really interesting, Raph, because I don't cue breath, right? Funny that, and we'll talk about that from a motor learning perspective in a moment. But what's been interesting, and my clients in group settings, they're used to me not cueing breath, right? They never even ask, like, when should I be inhaling? When I'm like, well, whenever you bloody want to. Like, they just do the thing and it just doesn't come up in my classes, right? And it was interesting one day, I remember it was a full class and I had this one instructor come in. She hadn't been to my class before and she was trained with the breath, yeah? And we're getting ready for footwork. All my regulars lay down on the reformer. She did too. The the first thing I know, I'm like, oh, here we go. She starts palpating her ASIS and pubic symphysis, doing the whole like, let's try and get in the neutral. And I'm thinking, right, okay, like that just to me is giving me some little behavioural indications of what she might be expecting / what is her training.
And you and I have been there, totally been there.
We've been there. Yeah. We've been there. I feel like it was
a while ago now.
It was a while ago since I've done, but we've been there, so I'm not going to poo-poo that. But I just thought, oh, this is interesting. This to me is a little like, okay. And then the first movement, we push that carriage out and in, and no, so I just let it go. I just ignore it. Bless all my regulars. They're doing these like side looks and like what's going, like it was so noticeable because it's such an outrageously loud breath, isn't it? And I remember when I was first going to classes, when I was STOT trained, it would be the breath pattern I would go into. And I've noticed actually that even sometimes when I filmed myself doing an exercise, my breath is louder than it probably needs to be. Yeah. So it's been modal learned into me, right? Like it correlates with me doing Pilates in my own body. I don't cue it, but it's interesting when I do it because I've got so much of it in me that it's, Yeah,
but that's not Pilates breathing, is it? Not according to Joseph Pilates.
Well, not according to Joseph Pilates, exactly. And then and when my students ask me about breathing and what's the rule, you know what I often say? Depends what school you went to. Like it literally depends what Pilates school you went to. Because they all kind of like some of them have the some of them they have the depending on what level where you inhale. Sometimes you inhale on the exertion, sometimes you exhale on the exertion. I'm of the impression that if you're a beginner, then you exhale on the exertion. But if you're advanced, you actually inhale on the exertion. Have you heard that as well?
Yeah, that's what we used to. That's the basic rule of thumb in STOT that I learned. Yeah.
Right.
Because the exhale on exertions to quote stabilise, end quote, your spine.
Jesus fucking Christ. If you're still teaching anyone to stabilise something, please go listen to that episode of Elephants. Because my tolerance levels for that is getting pretty low. So that's his kind of basic spiel on breathing. But in, say, Return to Life, there are instructions about when to breathe in and out. Yes. And we've spoken about that, and I thought, didn't we speak about that with John Howard Steele, Cage Line? Get your push-ups in, pals.
That's awesome. Do a pull-up.
And he
just got to keep it balanced.
Keep it balanced. So I'm going to have a T-shirt made called Cage Line, and you're going to have a T-shirt made called Awesome.
No, Cage Line on the front, Awesome on the back.
OMG, Raph. Please, if one of our listeners, a bit of like, if you'd like to make us a T-shirt, we will wear it. If you're out there and you're a graphic designer and you make some T-shirts, make us a T-shirt. We'll wear it on air for you, which is being videoed. So we'll put it on YouTube. Love to see one of those. Yeah, that's cute, but I digress. So a couple of things to talk about here. Return to Life was written by Joseph's interpreter, so we think. And remember when you asked John, is that, the way it is written, is that how Joseph spoke? And John's like, no, it's not how Joseph spoke at all. Absolutely, Joe had a strong German accent, but he could speak and understand English well, I thought. Or that's the impression. It seemed that he didn't like to say a lot. That was just his manner potentially, but he could definitely understand English clearly, etc. But he did not write like he does. And I'm going to guess Your Health would have been penned as well by a ghost writer. So in regards to Return to Life, I can't remember who said this. Was this, I don't want to quote someone incorrectly if it wasn't them. Was it Benjamin Degenhart? But I'm not sure. That someone said it was the interpreter that said we need to put the breath cues in. But it wasn't how Joseph taught it. So when you asked John Howard Steele, who was physically there being taught by Joseph, how did Joseph cue breath? Well, he cued take an inhale and then exhale. terrible. That was not a German accent at all. I'm sorry. That was really awkward, everyone. I'm embarrassed for myself. Heath Lander does a really good German accent. John Howard Steele does a really good German accent. Chloe does not, so I just won't try that again. But is that your understanding of it as well, Raph?
Yeah, also. Yep. And moreover, like when you look at the breath patterns in Return to Life, and the written instructions in Return to Life are so difficult to follow. They're really
full on,
really complicated.
You're better off just looking at the photos, to be really honest.
Absolutely. But when you look through it, by and large, exhale is on flexion and inhale is on extension.
Right.
By and large, not always.
Wait, you've looked that close. I must have been. I haven't looked that closely at it.
But and so like if when I'm teaching a group of students and they're going, oh, what's the breath pattern? What's the breath pattern? I'm like, okay, we'll just do the roll up a few times. Notice how you breathe. Now look in the book, and they're like, oh yeah, I was already doing it.
Right. Oh, genius, Raph. Why haven't you passed that one on to me? That's a really handy tidbit for myself and the trainers. Thanks. That's brilliant. That's fantastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? He's describing the movement, right? So if you just do the movement, it's kind of intuitive.
Yeah.
When you roll up, you want to exhale, right?
Yeah.
So, because as we know, that's the biomechanics of breathing.
Right. There you go. Okay.
So,
let's loop back then to when we think about cueing breath, because I remember back to my STOT days. And for your exam, you had to remember every single freaking inhale and exhale of every single exercise. And to be honest, that's what I was so fucking stressed about learning the breath. So I did a little cheat and I took the awesome Stella Atwood. We've mentioned her a few times. I took her in as my body because she was already fully trained and certified, right? I'm like, sure, she's got to know these breathing patterns. And I said to her, I'm going to, sorry, just FYI, Nick, Raph, it's a little bit of a cheat. I brought Stella in on purpose and I said to her, are you about to take my certification?
Yeah, I'm going to have to write to Stott head office.
And I said to her, just breathe a little louder and more exaggerated than usual. So you will be my lead as to where the inhales and exhales was. I was too busy learning the fucking exercises, let alone the breath patterns. It's ridiculous. So, and the worst thing was though, Stels came in and we both forgot this one exercise and I looked at her and she goes, I can't remember. And I was just like, scissor, like that's like Nick Vance would remember this moment. Thank God she had her head down, was taking notes at the time. Stel's looking at me panicked. So here's the thing. If you cue breath 50 million times, if you ask people to totally just focus on when they breathe, that is what they're going to focus on, okay? That is what they're going to focus on. So all that does, particularly when you are learning something new, is hampers your learning of the motor skill being the choreography of the exercise. So what that means is every time that client comes into you to class, all of a sudden again, you've got to teach them the freaking whole exercise from go to woe again because they're like, but when do I inhale? When do I exhale? All they're thinking about is when they breathe. So you are hampering motor learning. Okay. So if you are going to add in breath, if it's important to you or it's important to your clients or you want to add it in as that little extra finesse, do it when they already know the other stuff.
Do it a bit later on.
Do it when they're, they know what footwork is. They know what, the roll up is. They know this, if you want to add it in as a layer, add it in then, right? But all the time. And look, I remember how annoying. I think my classes used to be really annoying because every single second word that was inhale now, exhale, inhale, exhale. A, I could have just shut up and let people move. B, we could have had a chat about what's happening in people's lives, something fun, other stuff.
Yeah. And also it's like it just takes away their autonomy. It's like, well, that's like one of the most basic functions in life is breathing.
Right.
So, and I'm exercising and how do you know how fit I am and how often I need to breathe? Right. It's like
but remember to breathe, Raph.
That's a trigger cue for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I know. Did you feel that pause where I'm just like, it is for me. And I know when we talked in our episode with Anthony, he made a good point that, for someone, and he's coming more from a rehab pain perspective, we're going to have a little chat about that now. I think Anthony was coming more from that, and we're going to talk about now why it may be helpful to cue some breath and what sort of breath. But from a group Pilates perspective, I tell you what, no one's going to forget to breathe.
No.
Because otherwise they'll die.
Yeah. So we do the Valselva Maneuver, which is when you breath hold. You basically you pressurize your abdomen.
When you're lifting something heavy?
Yeah, when you're lifting something heavy, and that stiffens your torso. And so if you're doing something like the hundreds, where your gravity wants to bend your torso, and the whole point of the exercise is to keep your torso still, well, the Valselva Maneuver is going to make that a little bit easier. So it's a natural. People aren't forgetting to breathe. Their autonomic motor system is on purpose
but
holding
I need
breath
to ensure
make it
that
easier.
they're doing in for 5, out for 5, Raph.
Well, you can if you want.
Obviously, I was being limited.
So anyway, so it's not people forgetting to breathe. It's people's motor system on purpose not breathing to make the movement easier, right? That's
Gotcha.
If you're at home, just go lift up something heavy, see what happens. That's what you do.
The hollow body hold, which, from gymnastics, which is what we see replicated time and time again in Joseph's contrology. Yeah. It's a stiff torso.
Yeah, stiff. So anyway, that breath holding, the Valselva Maneuver, helps you stiffen your torso. Yeah. And any elite athlete does it when they lift or whatever. So all right,
okay.
so reminding people to breathe, not necessary in my view. But when would you cue breath? Well, I think like Anthony said the other day, if someone comes in and they've got a pattern, some particular activity that is painful for them, whether it's forward bending or backward bending or lifting or stepping or whatever, right? One of the things that, about pain is that it can become, basically conditioned, right? So conditioning maybe is not the, technically exactly the right term, but it basically, when we experience all of the context in which we previously had pain, that context can trigger a painful experience. Just like if you had, if you hear a particular song that, when the first, one time you heard that song, there was some like really intense emotional thing happening for you, whether it's a joyful emotion or a sad emotion or whatever, right? When you hear that song now, it can trigger that emotion, right?
Or a smell when you smell something.
Right, a smell. Even like TV shows and things can trigger emotions because they, that were associated with when we saw that TV show or smelled that smell or whatever. It's like it becomes conditioned, right? And so pain can be the same. So if you've become conditioned to, every time you squat in a certain way or bend in a certain way or step in a certain way, it's painful. It can become like habituated, it can become painful, like conditioned. So, and part of the context is how you breathe, right? So if you typically if you anticipate pain in a sort of movement, most people will kind of hold their breath and brace, okay? And so, encouraging them to breathe in or breathe out, during the movement instead of bracing, not because bracing is bad, but just because doing something different can create a different context, which then can alleviate that, not trigger that pain response. But by the same token, if somebody's conditioned to going as they bend, right? Yeah. Well, that can be part of the context that can trigger the pain response. So getting them to actually breath hold or inhale instead, just something different.
Yeah, just modulate it.
Just do something different, right?
Yeah.
Change the context. And it's like if, a really good analogy is like, okay, if there's a particular song that for you is very evocative and triggers a certain emotion, whether it's a happy emotion or a sad emotion, when you hear that song in your mind right now, you're probably hearing that song in your mind and you're probably feeling that emotion, right? But just imagine if that song was played by the Chickmunks, like really fast with really high-pitched voices. It's like it wouldn't trigger the same emotion, right? God. It's because you change the context enough, it doesn't trigger that experience. So that would be, one time where you could cue breath, but it wouldn't necessarily be about breathing a particular way.
Yeah.
It would just be about doing something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I have done that before too with clients who are, the client that walks in pain feeling like a plank kind of thing. Yeah. And just allowing them to do empowering them to do, not allowing, but empowering them to do some just deep belly breathing, just letting the belly puff up, relax, just softening into it, And again, it's just some, I guess, some neuromodulation maybe, you know.
Well, when you belly breathe, you relaxed breathing, belly breathing is something you only do at rest, right? Because as soon as you start exerting, you get some adrenaline in your system. That's when you start taking more forced inhalations and exhalations. So belly breathing, when you're at rest, you belly breathe. And when you belly breathe, you feel like you're resting, right? So there's sort of a bi-directional kind of influence there. And in fact, I've just got a little study in front of me called Breathing Technique in Pain and Cognitive Function, a systematic review of the literature from 2020. And what it basically says is that belly breathing alleviates pain. It's not like a miracle cure, but it has a significant and consistent effect of, if someone's in pain, whether it's back pain or neck pain or whatever, you lie them down on a comfortable spot and get them to focus on breathing deeply into the belly and relaxing fully, their pain decreases.
So the opposite of which would be getting to them to concentrate on activating their core and doing these really aggressive.
Right. So that's a time where I might cue breath, right? But it would be to cue like, okay, lie on your back, put a hand on your tummy, put a hand on your chest. Can you keep your chest kind of still and see if you can breathe into your belly, right? And can you then just as you exhale, just let it be totally relaxed, just flop.
I'm feeling really relaxed. You're just saying it. I'm like, I've noticed that I'm just sort of slumping more and more down into my chair.
Right. And that's why I would normally do this lying down with someone, right? I'd lie them on the floor, lie them on a table or
I've done it with them on the Reformer before. On the Reformer,
So that's a thing. Although interestingly, there's another systematic review which I've got called The Effect of Randomized Controlled Yoga Training Intervention Trials on Chronic Pain, a systematic review and meta-analysis of the effect of a single session of yoga postures with and without slow breathing on acute pain sensitivity, endogenous pain modulation and state anxiety. Sexy title.
Woo! That just rolled off the tip of the tongue.
So anyway, that's from 2020.
Ooh, nice and recent.
Basically what they found is yoga helps pain, right? So, and this was this was a single session of yoga and this was like experimental pain. So they sit you down and then they poke you with a red hot thing in your arm, not red hot, but, a hot thing in your arm.
So they're provoking the pain.
And they go, how much does that hurt? And you go, it's, 6 out of 10 or whatever. And then you do a yoga session and then they sit you down again and poke you with the same thing again and say, how much does it hurt? And you go, that's only 4 out of 10
Did
now.
they legitimately do that? Is that the model they used? They poked them with
a hot thingy, stick, whatever.
And gave them a burn. Not burn.
But I don't understand. Not hot enough to cause tissue damage.
Yeah, but like when you get poked with something, right, it hurts while you're being poked with it, depending on what it is, and then it doesn't. So I don't understand how this is a.
Well, it just hurt. It was just that they were just measuring the pain during the poke, right? So as you've got this hot thing on your arm.
Okay. Oh, sorry. And then they did yoga and then they re-poked them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm with you now. Sorry. I was like,
I'm imagining
where is this going?
Some kind of like hair curling iron or something.
That really hurts. Like I've done that many times. I had quite a burn on my
not hot enough to damage the dermis.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, and what they found was, yes, yoga helps, right? But adding deep breathing to yoga didn't help more.
Oh.
Because in yoga, you're breathing anyway, right? It's vinyasa yoga,
Yeah, well, every single yoga class I've ever been to, I've had the breath cued throughout.
And so this was like yoga with cueing breath and versus yoga with not cueing breath.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and they found it didn't make any difference.
Wow.
But so maybe, yoga, does something, it calms down the nervous system in a similar way to belly breathing. And it's like if you do both of them, it's like we already calm down your nervous system. You can't calm it down twice.
And is yoga unique to if we did the same study with running or we did the same study with Pilates or we did the same study?
Yeah, don't know.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
But, so anyway, I would say.
I feel that would be fair if we could compare it to other modalities as well.
Belly breathing is we know yoga for chronic pain is no better or worse than any other darn thing, right? Yeah. It's been tried against everything and it's the same. So I think, what we can say with confidence is that belly breathing, relaxed diaphragmatic breathing is, an effective tool in your toolbox if you have pain.
Right. So, Raph, when you say diaphragmatic breathing, because, you know, it's funny, I think that's often been a trigger word for me because it's like, well, isn't every breath diaphragmatic? But what you're saying there is diaphragmatic without involving
just
the
relaxed
auxiliary
breathing,
muscles.
just at rest breathing.
So I think it's good to sort of, yeah.
So keeping your neck relaxed, keeping your trunk relaxed, keeping your abdominals relaxed, everything's relaxed. It's just your belly puffing out as you inhale, and then your belly just like elastically recoiling.
Yeah.
You know, you just relax, and the exhale happens all by itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Okay. So I guess I just want to loop back one more time to this correct way to breathe, if it, you know, with Pilates, and if you're not breathing like that, it's not Pilates. When I'm thinking more, and I know I keep looping back to this, but it is the most, I think, if we're thinking about Pilates breath, that's probably the
Do they do that in other, like in Bassi and in Balanced Body and Polestar and stuff like that?
I don't believe it's just Stott, but I mean, I don't want to say that and then it is, but so that forced exhalation, I'm going to assume is coming. I'm making an assumption is coming from a place where they're wanting to actively engage transversus abdominis.
It's to recruit transversus abdominis and pelvic floor.
Yeah, right. Okay. When doing that, how much exactly transversus abdominis and pelvic floor are we engaging anyway? And wouldn't it just be more effective to do something else? Like, is that genuinely an effective way to recruit those muscles?
Well,
that would be
like we talked about
doing.
In Pilates for athletes, like the studies on transverse abdominis recruitment in different exercises haven't really been done.
That's
so
right.
we can't compare that. But we know that for all the other muscles, you know, no, it's not a great way. But, you know, I mean, yeah, sure, it's you know, it's a way to recruit your transverse abdominis. But it's like, well, just cough or something and, you know, put your hand on your tummy and see what happens.
You can't go to Pilates class and cough, and particularly not in the age of COVID. It'd be like public enemy 101, get the fuck out of my class now sort of thing, you know. It's like that the classic, yeah. I'm sure all instructors who are listening to this can relate to this, the classic when the client comes in to the enclosed like group reformer room and you're like, how's everyone going? Oh, I'm really crook. I've got the day off work. I'm just coming to sweat it out. And you're just all there like, what?
Surely there's a much bigger taboo on that now.
My word, that's what I'm thinking. Like I'm thinking COVID will have put a kabush on that. But
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. In terms of recruiting transverse abdominis, I just think, you know, I mean, we could have a whole episode on that, but it's like I just think, you know, why cue it? You don't cue your freaking triceps when you're doing a tricep extension.
Gotcha.
You know, it just fucking works.
Gotcha.
You know, like, why cue it?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
You know, like, I don't ever see people cueing sternocleidomastoids, and if your sternocleidomastoids relax, well, what happens to your head? It falls onto your back. You know, so. Yeah, they just fucking work all the time. That's awesome.
So,
you know,
so this is really, I mean, it's in our the magical muscles, isn't it? It's like the transversus abdominis is the sexy muscle.
Yeah, yeah. What about when you inhale? You know, what about cueing serratus posterior superior? You know, serratus anterior. You know, rhomboids. Like, you know, why don't we ever cue those ones?
Yeah. Well, Raph, I feel like that was pretty comprehensive.
I reckon that's just about our longest episode in the history of episodes.
We've really gone there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really love that. And if you're curious about good old JHP, Your Health, we'll link to Your Health in the show notes.
Drop some acid and read it.
We don't
advocate drugs. No.
Do push-ups and read it.
Don't take drugs.
Don't be a fool. I had to stop with the drinking games. It's push-ups. Awesome chat, Raph.
Yeah, good chat.
Loved it. Bye.